Hey, everybody. Welcome to Career Happy Hour. Let's just let the video streams catch up, and we should be good to go here in just a moment. So, thank you for joining. If you would please grab the chat and put any career related questions that you have in there, and I'll do my best to answer. I would encourage you to share your LinkedIn profile as well. So, if that's something you're comfortable with, then please go ahead and take advantage. Take advantage of this time to um, ask a question or even join me if you want to for online coaching. So this is a live stream, and you can join the live stream, and we can have a conversation, and I can help coach you through a situation or a challenge you might have regards to your career or something that you're challenged by, whatever that looks like. You can either do that through the chat here on, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, and we're on Twitter. So you can use any of those channels to put chat or comments, and we'll do our best to answer that, whether that's live or in the replay. We do monitor those comments in that chat to provide you answers. So go ahead and put your answer in there or your question in there. We'll provide an answer. Good. And so part of this process is to have a community where we can actually share. And by share, I mean we primarily are talking about LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is a platform of interaction, a platform of networking. And it's hard enough with the 800 plus million accounts that there are on LinkedIn to actually connect with a human being and have a conversation isn't as easy as you can imagine. Many people say no, but this community is different. Why is that? Because people who put their LinkedIn profiles in the chat, people that come here, in some ways are admitting that they are available. And so if you see somebody put their LinkedIn profile in the chat here or on any of the platforms that we're broadcasting, then that's indicating to you that you should reach out to them, have a conversation, and most likely, depending on your approach, of course, they will say yes. And I have people reach out to me all the time, and they ask for a question or a few minutes of my time, and I'm more than happy to say yes. Now, that's by no means a reason for you to try to sell me something. It's an opportunity for us to practice this craft called networking. And so some of us have preconceived notions about what that is. If you have any questions about that, you're welcome to visit my podcast. It's called Job Seekers Radio. I do it with Scott Picard Jones. It's our co-hosted podcast. By the way, just an alert, some of the links in that podcast have been broken, and I'm in the process of restoring those. So please be patient. That podcast should be back up and running likely by the end, hopefully by the end of the weekend. So appreciate that, your patience during that time. Good. So that's a part of it. Put your LinkedIn profile in the chat and reach out to people that are there, and we'll go with that. And you can certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn. My profile is on the screen. It's most of the platforms I'm on have the same handle, and it's Branding Dynamo. So that said, what is the topic for today? Well, actually, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Andrew Beach. I'm a teacher of self-education. I help professionals communicate their value to find great opportunities faster, whether they're working or not. And that's through a pragmatic process of branding, planning, and effective networking. And in fact, just before this session here today, had a conversation with a gentleman, helping him through working on his brand and identifying what that is. And sometimes it's not clear to us. Sometimes we have a set of experiences, we have a job title, we have a resume, we have some things available to us to help us find work, but we really don't know how to communicate that in a way that allows people to see your value and for you to feel good about it. Because there's something I think missing in a resume, and that is, what are your values? How do you communicate values through a resume? Sometimes it's really difficult. And so we take the other side of the approach and say, hey, let's define the product or service that you offer first, and then let's go and look at LinkedIn and a resume and so forth. So good to see you. Much appreciated, Scott. Scott's a great resource here on LinkedIn. I suggest you all contact him and have a conversation. Very generous with his time and contributions. So I do appreciate, as always, Scott, your attendance here. Lee, good to see you. So here's our first question. Thank you, Lee. I appreciate that. What are your thoughts on remote work during the pandemic? Well, most people, even though there's still people with COVID, would proclaim that we're at the tail end or maybe even outside the pandemic. So remote work during the pandemic was status quo. That is not so now. Today, we're kind of post-pandemic, I would say. We're pretty much there. And post-pandemic, remote work is being survived in companies that value their workers. And let me say that in a way that people understand, because people who want to work remote should have that capability. Now, what I believe and what is happening in the marketplace, two different things. But an organization that believes their employees have value will give them an option. They've worked 2 years, often in, I would say, circumspect conditions, conditions that were not optimal, and they stuck with the organization. They couldn't just go find another job during the pandemic. Most people couldn't do that. Some people lost their jobs during the pandemic. So, in terms of remote work, I think the bigger question might be, Lee, how do you find remote work now? And because not every organization is come out and scream from the rooftops, we offer remote work opportunities. And so I would say that that's a fair question. And as you might imagine, my answer is the same, because I've realized in career and in job search, all roads lead to networking. So if I want to find remote work, where am I going to find? I'm going to start with the people I know. I'm going to again move to the people I don't yet know, but probably should, probably from that first group, right? Talking to the people we don't know gets us to the ones we don't know, but probably should, that could indeed lead us to remote work opportunities. Now, just as an example, I had a good network connection. I saw that they were relieved of their job opportunities through a layoff at a fintech company. And this is a valued member of my network. We stayed in touch. I just reached out to her and said, have you looked at this other fintech company over here? I know somebody there. Be happy to make an introduction. Said introduction led to an interview. Said interview led to an offer. How long did that take? 5 minutes, maybe? But what kind of, just think for a second on that scenario, because it happened over the course of maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks at the most. 8 weeks, found a remote work opportunity at another fintech company that was right up their alley. 5 minutes that took me to make that introduction. What kind of mind share do you think I have in that person's wheelhouse, right? Up in the cranium? What kind of feeling do you think that person associates with me taking that 5 minutes to make that one introduction that led them to a job offer in 6 or 8 weeks? I mean, I can't think of an equivalent. So this is why I do what I do, because I want to see people successful. And I think that's something that we can all do. I'm still learning. Don't think I have it figured out. But the idea here is, if we give to enough people, it's going to come back to us. And so when I maybe want to, not that I'm anticipating this happening, but if I want to leverage some of my relationships in an organic and very natural way because I've given to somebody else, doesn't that feel a little more natural? And so this is kind of a long answer to a simple question, but the idea is, if there's something you really want and that thing happens to be remote work, start with a relationship first. Because if you go to somebody and say, hey, so-and-so, I'm in the marketplace, I'm looking for a remote job, hate what I'm doing now, I'm running away from something, and I'd really like you to save me or rescue me, right? That communicates something. And so if I come to that person and say, hey, pandemic, things are kind of wonky, are you okay? How can I help you? You see how paradoxical that is? That if I come to somebody and ask them about them, how does that help me? Well, it doesn't directly. It does indirectly, and it demonstrates that even though you could take a position of self-interest, you decide not to. And so I think that's a little bit different approach. So if you want to go deeper on that, Lee, I am happy to go there with you if you want to have that question. The boy, I've used venerable, I've used auspicious, indomitable. How about that? Indomitable Terry Smith in the live stream today. Hi, Andrew, joining from sunny basement lounge in Smith Casa, Northeast Portland. Happy to chat and network. Great, thank you. I appreciate that, Terry. Terry's a good advocate of Career Happy Hour and this community that we have here today. He'll occasionally, maybe today's one of those occasions, where he'll come in and actually make some contributions on the topic, because I think he might have some contributions to make. Primarily because the topic is, and I had this conversation literally just before this particular stream with that client I told you about, where we're working on their brand and putting together their narratives and whatnot. But one of the things I want to talk about today, particularly, is this idea. Let me hide that really quickly. This idea. What is the idea? Let's add it to the screen so we can talk through this. Okay. The job that I want doesn't pay well, and I'm just gonna put that out there as a statement. Okay. The job that I want doesn't pay well. And this is a statement that I received from somebody in my network. And so let's just unpack that just for a second. And so here's the backstory of this. So this person had a network conversation, and one of the people they were talking to told them, hey, I see that you want this kind of work. This kind of work that you're thinking about pays this much. Turns out that this much was a lot less by about, I don't know, $50,000 than what they were currently making in another job. And so I think that can be discouraging. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because it may be true for that person. It may be true in that situation, but it may not be true for you. And so what do we do with that? Well, it's been my experience that every time I hear somebody say something or make a claim, I just take that as a data point. It's one data point from one person in one situation. And so, so what do I do? I need a larger sample size. And again, I'm not looking for the rule. In this case, doesn't pay as well. That's the rule. What am I looking for instead? I'm looking for the exception to the rule. And the exception to the rule is how can I get that work and have it pay what I'm earning in my other role now, or the amount that I'm expecting. And so sometimes we take that piece of information from one person, one situation, and we now think that's true for all people in all situations. And that's, I think, very challenging and very dangerous and somewhat deflating perspective. And I wouldn't advocate anybody take that kind of approach. What is the approach I would use instead? One data point, one person, one situation. I need to triangulate or in some way figure out, is that prevalent across all companies, all job titles, and all industries? Because I think when we go with the all alternative or the never, right, all or never, I'm never going to find a job that does X, or I'm never going to get paid blank, or, these kind of words have a defeating purpose to them. So take that one person, that one situation, and say, okay, for this person in this situation, this is what I'm reading. Let's go talk to some other people, maybe in that same organization or that same industry, see if they have the same perspective. Let's take that to a different person, maybe in a different industry or a different company, and see if that holds up or not. Let's not presume and ask a self-fulfilling question. Oh, well, I'm interested in that kind of work, but, I heard that doesn't pay well. So I'm still an advocate, as you might imagine, of finding out, what does the market say? Not what does this person think that job is worth, or their own perception of that value. What does the market say? And so there's a lot of resources. We've talked about these before, like PayScale and salary.com, and LinkedIn's got a salary tool. So there's no lack of data related to pay scales. Now, I can also go to things like Glassdoor and ask people maybe that I see that work there, send them a private message. I think you can do private messages on Glassdoor. Maybe someone could confirm that for me. I've never actually done it, but now that I've said it, you can steal my idea. But I think you can actually direct message people on Glassdoor, because you have to log into Place to get a lot of the data out of their program, and for good reason. They're doing, in my mind, an exceptionally valuable service to us as individuals by having this data be out there, they're somewhat agnostic, and organizations cannot remove or in any way change the data that's there. So it's kind of like Yelp that way, although Yelp, I think, has been subject to some manipulation. But I don't get the impression that that's the way with Glassdoor, because they have such a broad cross-section of people providing data that I'm not sure that that's happening there. But Glassdoor is a great resource. And so just because you think a job doesn't pay well doesn't mean that it will. And that's what I'm driving at, is that if I'm in a situation where I believe that something is true, then I'm always going to believe that it's true. And if I heard it from one person, then it must be true for everybody. You can see how that, when you start thinking about it, is almost it's almost nonsensical. And I'm not disparaging somebody for receiving this information and processing it that way. But if you're analyzing your job prospects and you're networking with people, and you finally get somebody on the hook, I say that in an affectionate way, of course, and you have this great conversation, and they're like, oh, it doesn't pay as well. Then I have a choice to make, right? If I'm going to go down that direction with that person, that situation, that company, that industry, perhaps that's the reality in the short term. And so then I have to make a decision. When do I hop to the next level? Is that a leadership role? Is that an elevated role? Is that a partnership? Is that me going out on my own? I mean, I don't know the answer to these questions, because everybody's journey is so different. And so if it doesn't pay well, question your thoughts about if that's true or not, and see if you can find the exception to the rule through your networking, through your research, through the things that you're doing to meet with people and have these really poignant conversations about where you're headed. Indomitable. I love it. Excellent. I'm glad you can spell it. I could barely pronounce it. So I think, I love it. Good. All right. Yeah, no, I understand, Scott. I'm not expecting everybody's going to sit through my whole discussion or this live stream and hear me answer questions. So you can always catch the replay. I think there's, I've had a lot of people unknowingly, which is funny, watch this live stream, and I bump into them, or we have conversations and say, yeah, I love you doing that Friday thing. I watch it on Saturday, or watch it once in a while. I'm like, great. But don't just hang on to it. Share it with somebody. I think that's the key, is that, keeping it to yourself is, selfish. And I'm not here to judge. What I'm here is to just share the truth. And so by sharing, and you don't have to share it publicly, you could share it in a private message. You could certainly get somebody to watch it, share it publicly on your social channels. There's a little share button. Doesn't matter what platform you're on, and you can do that. Now, if you do, I'm going to put a link here. Sorry, folks, I got to hop over to LinkedIn, because unfortunately, Restream does not have a direct connection to the LinkedIn platform. So I'm going to come over here, pause that, and I'm going to put into the chat, join me live for free coaching right now. And Terry, or if anybody else other than Terry wants to come in, you're welcome to do that. And so you should see somewhere in the chat that link. Hopefully it shows up. Let me see if it came on the other side. That doesn't look like it went in. And let me refresh. Sorry about that. Thank you for your patience, everybody, today. Let's see if this works. There we go. Okay. Now that's in the LinkedIn. You'll have to copy and paste it off the LinkedIn. I think maybe I can change the, let's see, manage. No, I don't think that's it. I think there's a way to do it. I don't see it right now. Anyhow, and then I'll also put it over here in the, there we go. And the Restream chat, which will then go to YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, I believe. Anyway, good. So, oh, there's Terry. Wow, that was fast. He's quick to the draw. So hopefully he's got the HD webcam turned on this time, because we like the HD web. I think, don't we, Terry? Well, maybe we do. Let's see.
We'll find out in a moment.
Yeah. Well, let's see what Terry has to say. I'm sure the indomitable Terry Smith has something to share on this topic of, hey, that job don't pay very well.
Well, yeah, been through that experience once or twice in my career, and I've had colleagues and friends that have gone through that same exercise. And I think what it really boils down to are a couple of things. One, is it something that speaks to you in a way that, transcends sort of that financial or remunerative, there's a nickel word for you.
Cash money.
Thank you. Cash money.
Yeah.
So, and obviously, being paid what you feel that your value is that you bring is important, but there may be situations where the opportunity is something that speaks more to your heart than necessarily to your wallet, and so the point you made a minute ago about making a decision is very apt. I went through that exercise a few years ago where, I took a fairly substantial pay cut to join an organization. I actually did this twice in the last couple of rounds. More recently, fairly substantial pay cut, not brutal, but enough to be noticeable, because I really wanted to get involved in that particular industry. And it was a great experience, and I really, value the opportunity. And then previous to that, similar kind of thing. It was an opportunity to work for an organization that was not a nonprofit, but a not-for-profit. And so it was, the basic idea was that it was a revenue generating organization, but the revenue they generated went back into, publicly fungible research and education and so forth. So,
nice.
A little bit different rhythm. It wasn't answering to shareholders in that sense. So, and that again was an opportunity to do something that really had a feeling of value and meaningful activity to me. I could take what I was doing and apply it in an environment where the outcome was very, very positive. So, and that was a pretty significant haircut in that case. But interestingly enough, after a few years'
that you needed a haircut, right?
Right, exactly. But, after a few years' time, not only did I ultimately catch up, and here's the interesting element of it, not only did I catch back up to where I had been, but I exceeded it, just over time. So, that's another thing to consider too, is that you may take a short-term step backwards for a longer-term opportunity and benefit. So,
well, I mean, I've seen people, promoted in as fast as 3 months, maybe faster, 6 months for sure.
Mm-hmm.
A 1 year. That's not out of the ordinary to see people promoted after a year, or being eligible to pursue other opportunities in an organization.
Yep.
So, even if they don't make a promise, if it's a large enough organization, there's likely going to be opportunities.
Right.
And if there isn't, you can always keep your radar tuned in to the airwaves, and there's always opportunity in the marketplace. I don't know if people are hiring or not hiring or what have you, but I always seem to find that there's opportunity everywhere. You just have to seek it out.
Yeah.
And so the other question I had for you, Terry, is maybe this person thinks the job doesn't pay well, but they don't really know. And perhaps you go and you apply for a role and there is something available, but what happens in those scenarios? Because I know this is a complex thing, compensation, but what happens in those scenarios where, hey, this person over here has that job and they said it's this much, but you go to apply to that role and it's like, they weren't really honest with me, or maybe they don't know, but I got paid what I wanted. And so I know organizations are really doing their best to try to, if that happens, to bring everybody's level up to the same spot. So is that something that organizations are really doing? Or if I, looked in the books at everybody that's got the same job title, are they really being paid the same?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, just because you've got a bunch of different forces involved. You've got your organization's budget and all those sorts of discussions around, what they're able to pay relative to what the marketplace may be doing. And so if I'm reading you right, the question is, is there sort of an internal equity, aspect of this?
Right.
Is that
or if I come to this process and I kind of feel like it's not going to pay as much, but I go through the process anyway.
Yeah.
And I get to an offer phase and it's a lot closer than I thought it would be to what I wanted.
Well, yeah, and that's an interesting point. Oftentimes let's put it this way: when I've seen things like that happen, it's usually a combination of, kind of a realization that the individual is bringing more to the table than we originally believed when we first started the screening process, and we're discovering that, this person can add a bunch of value over here and over here, or on this or on that, or what have you. And so, okay, maybe we started with the notion that we've got this certain rate that we want to pay, but we may have some flexibility, and we may, by virtue of what we bring to the discussion, convince people in the organization that, hey, we need to maybe juice this a little bit so that we can really ensure that we bring this person in, because we don't want to lose them. They are clearly, capable beyond kind of what our initial view might have been, and what maybe our initial job spec might have been. And that's okay. And I've seen this happen multiple times where, the hiring manager, or even the recruiter for that matter, will go back and lobby for the candidate simply because, hey, we didn't realize how much value this person can bring to us. We didn't get that full scope until we sat down and had that conversation, and we did, the reference checking and all the things that, kind of give us that sense of confidence that not only are they really good, but they're maybe even a little bit better than we thought. So let's front load that a little bit. And so, that kind of advocacy goes on, I think, very regularly.
Yeah. So I think the message I'm really trying to send to individuals or candidates is, hey, there's so much more, so many more variables than just one person saying this is how much that role pays.
Right.
And I hear people giving that kind of advice all the time, or like, oh, well, if you go to nonprofit, you're not going to make as much. I mean, that's a bold statement, really, depending on what you're doing for the nonprofit, and
right.
Or your executive director. Maybe you came from the private sector and you were an individual contributor, but in this case, you'd be an executive director. It might be equivalent, if not a little more.
Yeah, and I think so. That's a really interesting example. A lot of nonprofits run on a very, very tight budget, so the chances are fair to middling that a lot of nonprofits, it is what it is. On the other hand, there are also nonprofits that have some flexibility and some room in their budgets to be able to to be a little bit more flexible with their pay rates, simply because as with all things, it's a competitive market and it's a competitive game, and if they identify somebody that is uniquely qualified to bring value to their organization, and in a nonprofit environment, it's particularly the case where a lot of your capacity is around fundraising, right? I mean, that's fundamentally what an executive director or a lot of other roles in nonprofits, that's what they do, right?
Yeah.
And so your ability to sort of bring with you your Rolodex, if you will, of people that and places you can go tap and so forth.
Yeah.
That can often have a real effect. Or, what may happen is, and I've seen this happen a lot. They may say, well, we don't have a lot of flex as far as the base salary is concerned, but you know what? If we hit certain milestones and bring in certain volumes of money, there's some variable comp that we can bring to the table,
right?
That type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess what I'm suggesting is a candidate, you can't rule things out until you actually see it.
Right. Yeah, you have to really get under the hood with it. If you're at that stage, if you're at that offer stage, and you've made this comment before, and we've talked about this, because they put forth an offer doesn't necessarily always mean that's it, right? And the opportunity to think it through and maybe do a little negotiating, is a very real opportunity. I'm kind of from the school of thought that says, and you and I have had this conversation before. When I make an offer to somebody, I want to make the best possible offer that I can, right? I want them to be, number one, excited about the job. They're thrilled to be joining my organization, doing the work that they really are interested in doing and all that kind of thing. So I want to take the simple question off the table, which is, what can we do to make sure we're compensating this talented person well? That's how I've always approached it. And I learned that from a guy who had been in the HR business when I got to work for him. He'd been in it for 40 years, right? And that was his number one lesson to me. I never forgot it, is, make the best offer. And so it's important, I think, for candidates to understand that
not everybody operates that way.
Not everybody operates that way. Yeah. And a lot of companies will operate with some negotiability in mind. And that's not to say that I was not negotiable, whenever I was making an offer, but I really wanted to get out of the negotiation conversation. I came from the old school of close the deal, close the hire, close the offer, right? From when I was a recruiter back in the day. And so, so let's do the best we can so that we don't have to get into that conversation. That the candidate says, "Oh my goodness, really? Thank you.
Yeah.
Here you go."
You don't want to give them any reason to say no.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would you do that? I mean, to me, that doesn't make sense. You've gone through all the time, energy, and investment in interviewing and taking people out of the operation and getting them to this point. Why would you put something mediocre on the table? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's it, and that's you make a really good point, because this is a process. We invest a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of energy into the interview process, the screening process, the interview process, the final interview process, the offer process. That's all overhead in a certain sense. So let's be as efficient.
And those costs are already gone, right?
Yeah, those costs are gone.
Yeah.
So let's not repeat them unnecessarily.
Yeah. Why would you want to start over again?
Yeah.
Why would you want to start over again? I don't
know. No, exactly. There's the few things in leading recruiting teams, or as a recruiter, the few things in the world that were more depressing than have to start over again.
Well, I guess it's better than making a bad hire and then going 6 months and then starting over again.
Well, there's that too. But if you've done your job up front, right, and you've done you've done your process, and you use a process that's logical and repeatable, then your chances of making that bad hire are significantly reduced.
Yeah.
It's when you get somebody. I had this happen once. When you get somebody that says, they get out of the first round of interview, and it's maybe not even a face-to-face, it's a over the phone interview, and they look at you and they say, "This is the right hire. I feel it in my gut."
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's going to last. And and it didn't. We hired this guy, and I had to terminate him 6 months later, and he was a very high level, individual.
See,
it was really bad.
I knew what I felt was true.
Yeah.
That's great. So Terry, anything current, relevant, or going on in your neck of the woods? Things that, trends you see that might be helpful to the Career Happy Hour crowd?
Yeah. So there's starting to become, I think, a little bit of pushback around this whole concept of the great rethinking, or whatever we're calling it this week, the great
Mhm.
resignation as it started out to be. And I think there's I think there's the beginnings of a fair amount of pushback from companies on the notion that, it's kind of a candidates market, and I would contend it still is a candidates market, but there's aspects of that are, maybe a little bit different. It's a little bit more selective perhaps than I think it's been before. I think, really kind of niche positions still tend to have a lot of candidates, and a lot of companies that are in a kind of position to be able to be a little bit more, what they would call selective, what I sometimes call wishy-washy. But I think there's a little bit more of that happening. But I don't think that's, I don't think that should deter anybody. I mean, there is still a tremendously robust job market. Even with the pandemic kind of winding down, some say.
So let me ask you this then. Do you feel that the TA community, talent acquisition community, has spun up to a point where they can actually staff fast enough? I get the feeling that that's still an issue that, well, let me put it this way. Even though the TA teams might be staffed up enough, the operation doesn't have bandwidth to interview and hire fast enough. Because they're the ones now that I think are a little bit understaffed, right?
Well, yes, I think that's
what are you
true.
sensing there?
Yeah, no, what I'm sensing is that, you have where you have breaks in the chain are at the hiring manager level, because there are just a lot of people that are out of position, that have left their organizations for other opportunities or what have you. And so there's a scramble in that space. The TA piece of it, in fact, if anything, companies are tightening their belts a little bit around the talent acquisition side of the house. Recruiters that I'm hearing about, being furloughed for a while or being let go altogether because they're just, they've got, I mean, the unfortunate part of it is they've got the work. They just don't have the tools inside the organization to be able to move it fast enough to support multiple recruiting staff.
Yeah.
That's
interesting. So I never thought of it that way. So what you're suggesting then is you have to be a little more patient as a candidate if it's a company you really want to work for, or a team you really want to be a part of, because the process might just be dysfunctional.
Well,
not for everybody, but for them.
It's not short of dysfunctional, but I would say it's kind of a reflection of the supply chain thing in some ways. You have an oversupply of people who are able to, who have a facility for attracting talent, and you have an undersupply of the leadership, community to be able to actually hire those folks. Well, we'd love to be able to hire you, Terry, but we don't have somebody in the leadership role to be able to make that decision, and we don't want to make that decision for whoever winds up coming in when we eventually are able to hire that person. We don't want to hire people and then say, oh, by the way, here's some people we hired for you while you weren't here, right? Seen that happen, well, we just can't hire these positions because we don't have somebody to lead that team. Now, that's kind of rare, but it does happen.
Yeah. Any experience that you've seen or heard, or that there's some organizations maybe experiencing employees that are still getting COVID or managing vaccine injury, or I'm just thinking through some of the things that are going on right now, at least that I've heard of. And also maybe this thing called long COVID. I know that's something that's real for a lot of people. So I don't know if you're hearing anything about that, or organizations and how they're handling that, because it's throwing into the mix, I think, some things that are, really unexpected.
One thing that I know is a trend for sure is that more and more organizations, as they're renegotiating their employee benefit programs, they're leaning into programs around mental health and wellness and, family support and things of that nature. And providers appear to be stepping up to that plate and really being, offering those kinds of services that they probably have always had, but they've just never really emphasized them the way that the pandemic has created the need for that kind of emphasis.
Yeah.
So that's a big change, and I am excited to see that simply because, in a larger sense, a lot of those kinds of sort of wellness and mental health and mental acuity kinds of benefit opportunities, we just have always sort of shortchanged that in our society.
Yeah.
And now that there's this thing that's happening that is having these effects, long COVID, is probably here to stay, I would think.
Mhm.
And so the smart providers are saying, let's lean into the wind on that and really, really do a good job with it. And let's make it an offering, particularly to our customer companies that are very, big organizations and have a lot of capacity around their insurance, their benefit programs and so on.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big deal. And I think that's going to continue.
Yeah. I mean, I can appreciate the need for mental health services.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I
been an enormously trying couple of years for so many of us, right?
Yeah. I just get the feeling there aren't enough service providers available for all the people that need the help,
Oh, that's
So if somebody
topic.
wants a job opportunity, you could listen to people's tales of woe and help them with that. I think you'd have a good business. I really do.
Well, that's and that is a very acute business. I mean, that's not something you just go out and post on Indeed and hope to hire somebody. Those are skill sets that are not only rare in training, but they're rare in acute in aptitude. And so I mean, you have to be wired a certain way to be able to do that kind of work in the first place.
Right.
So
yeah, because those people aren't immune to the effects of their own.
No,
therapy,
definitely not. I mean, look at look at the crisis in the nursing industry, right? I mean, that's a very, very good example of just the high burnout that's gone on in a lot of the healthcare community, right? I mean, nursing is the front line, really.
Totally.
And I have a relative who's a nurse, and he works in a COVID triage ward in Washington, and they, in something that 3 years ago didn't even exist, like a COVID triage award. What's that?
Yeah.
He does it all the time.
That's nuts. And then, coming in and saying, okay, well, you don't get the same, not recognizing the value of what they provided over those years.
Yeah.
I think it's just it's a tragedy. It's a real tragedy.
Absolutely.
So, I don't got anything else to share today, Terry. I think we did a good job. I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your perspectives. I know that
pleasure.
I know that people appreciate that, right? Hearing both sides of the equation from a company perspective, and then I try to bring the candidate perspective.
Well, and having obviously been a candidate myself over the years, but being sort of in that, in the front line of that loop, right, of that connection between people who want to work for an organization that wants to hire the right talent for the, I've learned a lot of things just over the years about that. I did a piece recently, so if I just can spin out for a second.
Sure.
One of the things that's a real sort of interview trend that we've seen, and organizations like Amazon in particular use this a lot, is the STAR method of interviewing. The situation, situation, tactic, action, result, right? Having gone through and trained people on that, one of the things I really I did a webinar earlier this year on this topic. One of the things that's really important is to understand how, as a candidate, you can use that methodology in your own approach to interviewing companies, right? Because, the company is coming at it with, okay, this is all about behavioral-based interviewing, and, tell us about this situation. What did you do? What was the requirement? What was, not tactic, but task. So, what was the task? What was the action? What did you go do? And what happened as a result? It's a really nice little structured thing. But as a candidate, number one, getting prepared for that and really doing a good job of thinking about those things is great. But then the other thing I've tried to coach people from time to time is, don't be afraid to use that method as a candidate with the person that you're interviewing, right? That's interviewing you. Because that will tell you things that you want to know about your organization. We could do a whole couple hours on this topic right off the
Yeah.
top here, and it's just because.
Well,
it's a
yeah,
great
doing
technique.
behavioral questions to the company and the
Yeah,
people that are working
exactly.
there. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what's the best one you've ever heard? Putting you on the spot, Terry. Here you talked about a subject or a topic and you don't have a question? Come on now.
No. It's like, which one do I
I'll
pick
start.
on?
I'll start.
Okay.
Tell me about a time when someone quit right before a weekend and there was a deadline on Monday. How did you handle that?
Right. That's a good one. That's a very good one. Never actually had that happen.
Okay. Well, tell me about a time when, right? Tell me about a time when you worked under a tight deadline. Someone decided they were going to resign. And so and it had to be done in a short period of time. How did you handle that?
Yeah. So I've had that happen a few times. So, first of all,
you don't have to answer the question.
Yeah, no, I want to, but
yeah, I know. But see, that's the interesting thing about questions, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that when you ask the question, people feel inclined to answer. And that's the thing I think a lot of candidates miss when they're interviewing is that they don't actually practice their questions. They only practice their answers because they feel they don't have, well, I got to know what to say. Geez.
Well,
so, what is communication? 7% is the words you're going to say.
Yeah, and the other 93% of it is all this stuff.
It is the nonverbals.
Right. No, those are good ones. I mean, one of the ones that I've used in the past is tell me about a time when you've had to deal with an employee who is having performance issues but doesn't understand that they're having performance issues, right?
Yeah.
That they don't, or that they are not seeing the same performance issues that other people are seeing. How, tell me the situation. What did you have to go do with it? What did you go do with it? And what happened as a result?
Yeah.
That's a pretty good one just because.
So you kind of fill it in then. You like fill it in with the asking more follow-on questions on top of that.
It's the basic pattern, here's the situation. Tell me about a time when.
Yeah.
Then the task, what did you have to do? The action, what did you actually do? And then the result, what happened?
Yeah.
So
got it. So let me ask you this question because I want to see how it lands with you. Okay. So it's at the end of the interview, right? Closing question. And so they you've gone through all your questions and they say, well, do you have any other questions for me? Right. You've already asked all your questions. Let's just you're at the end. Okay.
Yeah.
What questions or concerns do you have about my education or experience that would cause you not to hire me?
That's a good one.
But how would you respond? How would you just, not that you would answer it, but how did you feel about receiving that question?
Well, I've received it a fair amount over the years, so I kind of expect it, actually. In fact, all things being equal, if I don't hear it, I'm going to kind of scratch my head a little bit and say, well, I was kind of hoping that you would say.
I hear different flavors of that, though, that the way I said it's a little bit different. Okay.
Yeah.
Because normally what I hear is, how could I interview better? Right. Some variation to that question.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that one's a little more poignant. And I didn't come up with it. I got it from a friend of mine, but I've coached people to use that and I've used it and it actually is really helpful.
Yeah.
Because it kind of forces people to think, well, he's got this, he's got this, but there's this one thing that I didn't really feel like sharing, but since he asked, I'm going to share. Right. And that was the whole beauty of that question.
Yeah.
So have you heard it in that kind of way or do you hear it differently?
I hear it more in the standpoint or from the perspective of, do I have your vote of confidence on this job? Are you, do you see me as
what else do you need to hear from me to make a decision is kind of the gist.
Yeah, I've heard that too. But, interestingly enough, I don't hear them. I mean, I've heard them, but I don't hear them like every time. So that's kind of interesting. But usually, when somebody says that to me, and I love your context, what is it about any aspect of my background that would cause you to decide not to hire me, or words to that effect?
Yeah.
That's a really good one because, all things being equal, if I'm the interviewer, I'm going to say something very, very generic, like, well, there's nothing in particular that causes me concern or issue or fear. However, I also have several other candidates about whom I can say the same thing. So I appreciate the question. That's my answer. I've got a decision to make. The decision that I make is going to be my decision.
But I would say you're an experienced interviewer.
Yes.
Would you put yourself in the category of having done hundreds, if not thousands of interviews?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
The garden variety leader or peer, how often are they doing interviews?
A lot less than I do.
Right. So now I'm not disparaging you or your response, because you're equipped, right? You've been equipped because you know. So I'm coaching the people for those who are not equipped, right? And even though they may have had a training or a webinar or done a couple of minutes with an HR business partner, doesn't mean that they know how to interview. Nor do they have their scripts prepared, nor have they practiced.
Right.
Well, I do have this one question, right? So that's what I'm always getting. I'm either getting total silence, right? Because they can't think of anything that would cause them not to hire me, Yeah. And so that's the good response. The other response was, which is secondarily good, is, well, there's this one thing. We feel like you don't have any industry experience. Let's just use that, right? You don't have any education experience. You don't have any, apparel experience. You could just fill in the blank with the industry.
Yeah.
And now it's out on the table, and I have a chance to respond.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so not every question, if you asked it, is going to yield that outcome.
Right.
So I've just found that one's, unless there's a better variation that I come across, that's the one I'm suggesting people use at the end of the interview.
No, I think it's a good one. I think it's a really good one, because you're right. It does put the interviewer, particularly the inexperienced interviewer, and parenthetically, there are a lot of people out there who claim interview capacity but demonstrate a lack.
Yeah, I know.
Let's just leave it there.
I know.
But
I mean, I get the same thing on the other side, right? As candidates, right? Oh, I'm good with interviews. I don't need any prep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me tell you, I have done interviews for 35 years, and I always need prep.
Yeah.
To this day, if you walk into an interview unprepared, then you deserve whatever you get, and I mean, I don't mean that pejoratively. I just mean that simply that, take the time to do the prep. I have a good friend, colleague, who love the man dearly, but he does not prep well. And, I mean, I've literally, watched him walk into interviews and just put my head down on the table, because I know that he's just not gonna, if he goes up against somebody that's a really savvy interviewer, he's not going to do well. Yeah. And this is a C-level guy,
Wow.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that at that level,
Yeah.
There really is.
Wow.
But no, I think that question, I think that's a great question. I think it's if people practice one thing, they should practice that, and just get really good at framing that question, so that even if, I mean, I've got some ways to respond to it, but not everybody does, and it's not about trying to catch somebody in an error. It's about really trying to position yourself as that strong candidate, right? That people who want to have the organization succeed would want to hire, because if nothing else, they ask really good questions, right?
Yeah. True enough.
Yeah.
Well, I think we did a good job. So
cool.
We now almost been on for an hour. So not that you've been on for an hour. I was on for a little while before you came in, but
sure.
So I think we're good. I'm going to call it a day.
All right. Well, me too. I've got a few things to wrap up and then head to the weekend.
All right. Have a good weekend, Terry. Be well.
You too. Take care.
Bye. All right, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of Career Happy Hour. We're here every Friday, 3 o'clock Pacific time, when I'm humanly available and capable of delivering this. I will be here to answer your questions. So put a little question down below, or a comment, or share this out with someone that you think might find value from it. And then we'll see you next Friday for Career Happy Hour. Be well. Have a great weekend.